Our last form of communication to talk about this semester is mass communication. Now, this is a bit different from what we've been talking about so far this semester, in that mass communication usually happens within a print or electronic platform. So you aren't saying words coming out of your mouth. You're maybe writing them or maybe posting talking about something on YouTube or something like that. But the channel for mass communication is electronic. It's not something that's going to happen face to face. This comes with a lot of interesting intricacies. So we can talk about the communication process way at the beginning of the semester, where we talked about and kind of modeled how communication works, how senders and receivers and feedback loops all add into how a communication scenario actually takes place and is processed. But with mass communication, that kind of breaks down. We don't have an immediate feedback loop. We don't really know who our receiver is going to be. And so that makes our communication message that we create a little bit more ambiguous. This is the place, again, where we want to contextualize mass communication in our three different realms. So thinking about spiritual, relational, and professional contexts, how does mass communication actually play a role in each of these three? First, we want to talk about spiritual. So one thing to be thinking about here is that there's a difference between the type of mass communication that you are doing versus the type of mass communication that you are seeing and receiving from others. So one thing that might be happening in thinking about your faith or how you talk about your faith is thinking about the platforms that you might be sharing your story on. So with mass media and mass communication, you're putting your story out there or your message out there, not really knowing who's going to run across it. Whenever we think about the audience, then that is a big question mark. It's a big unknown. And so the way that we tailor our story or the point to our story might be a little bit different. The second thing to think about is the types of stories that we might be consuming via mass communication or mass media. So mass media in and of itself has been studied and analyzed and picked apart by communication scholars for many years and decades. And one piece that they've been looking at is how religion plays a role in mass media and how mass media plays a role in religion. We often can illuminate the religious experience or the faith experience within the context of mass media, whether that might be an article on an online news website, a pastor actually giving a sermon on YouTube, or even via mediated characters on fictional television shows or movies. We can see what a spiritual life might look like, or what faith might look like, or how it might manifest. What we do with that information might be important in how we then think about ourselves and communicate with others in this big conglomeration of the different forms of communication. One thing to think about too is what might happen if we use mass media to talk about our spiritual life. So we talked way back in interpersonal communication about attributions. So we often view somebody or their message or their story and try and figure out what we can attribute to those pieces, how we can see that person within a particular light. And one thing that you don't have a lot of control over when talking about mass communication is what your sender or what your receiver thinks about you via the message that you gave. So particularly if you think about something that's put down in written communication form, you're not there to talk about the tone that it should be read in or the way that it should be contextualized. You're just hoping that your audience is taking that in on their own. And that could be pretty tricky to navigate. Within the relational context, we can think about how mass communication could play a role in creating relationships and maintaining relationships. One thing that I have found really interesting within my discipline and within my time kind of doing research is thinking about computer-mediated communication. So essentially, human communication, but via a computer or technology of some sort. I've spent some time looking into how things like social media could really impact the way that we engage in our relationships. And what I found there has been both really interesting and exciting and troubling. Social media can do a lot for creating relationships where maybe one wouldn't have been created before. Kind of going across the distance and making relationships and friendships, even if you're not close geographically. But the other thing that it can do is it can give you examples of other relationships to start comparing yourself to. One thing that we talked about in interpersonal comm is social comparison theory. And that has never been more prominent than in a mass media context. So I'm on Facebook or I'm on Instagram and I'm, interacting with my friends or my acquaintances within that platform, but I'm also seeing how everybody else is doing it. And that communication, what's happening there, how that looks, can impact how I feel about my own messaging, how I feel about my own relationships, and could directly then impact those relationships as well. Within mass communication, we'll talk a little bit about the dark side of mass communication and mass media and social media. And this is the place where things can get a little testy, right? We can be on Facebook engaging in communication, but something that might happen is that we can start spinning our minds to think about what might be happening underneath the surface when that might not be true. And so we want to take some time to think about media literacy within a new media perspective. So thinking about social media and how we can really think about what's being displayed on there and engage in it in a good way. But we also want to think about all the theories of communication that can really tell us how to take in information and use it well in relationship building. The last thing that we want to talk about is professional context and mass communication. Now, in an organizational context, mass communication via print and electronic media has exacerbated the amount of messaging that we can create, and it's also provided us with different channels to do things like advertising, journalism, or public relations. We can now get more messages out, maybe better messages out, and out to more people if we're using technology. But another thing to think about too, from a more personal, professional standpoint, is the fact that if you're engaging in mass communication in a print or electronic format, that's something that can stay in the world on the interwebs forever. And it might impact your professional career. We've often heard about a lot of individuals engaging in a job interview where before they even step foot into an interview, whether that be a physical space or a virtual space, the people interviewing them have already seen who they are based on what they have communicated to the masses online. And so we need to think about how that could impact our professional life, our career, and if it's doing so for the good or for the bad. So throughout this last big section of communication, talking about mass comm, we really want to think about how something that might seem really big can be contextualized down into specific areas of our life to help move forward our spiritual, relational, and professional contexts in a way where we can be successful and where we can be really proud of the type of communication that we've made.